Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Gathering for Justice's special town hall, A Call to Philanthropy. My name is Danice Mapanda, and I'm the COO at the Gathering for Justice. For those of you who don't know, the Gathering for Justice was founded by the legendary Harry Belafonte in 2005, after he saw a story on the news about a 5-year-old Black girl in Florida being handcuffed in her kindergarten classroom for throwing a tantrum. After realizing that children were being brutalized by police across the nation, despite the work of the civil rights movement, Mr. Belafonte brought together elders and youth from all across the country to form a covenant to end child incarceration and dismantle the systemic racism in our justice system. 16 years later, as we just celebrated our Sweet 16, the work continues, and some of the same challenges continue as well. We see a movement rising across the nation, unprecedented participation and focus on the very hard work of organizing for racial equity. Yet the commitment from the philanthropic sector to many community-based organizations remains static. So we are calling on philanthropy tonight. A few weeks ago, I commissioned and co-wrote a piece with my co-moderator tonight, Renee Jocelyn, that was published by Philanthropy Unbound. The overwhelming response to the article is a testament to the need for this conversation. And so, like we do here at the Gathering for Justice, we decided to take the conversation from the page to the stage, or the virtual stage. So let's get right into it. I'd like to first welcome my co-moderator for tonight, Renee Jocelyn, to the program. Hi, Renee. Renee founded Philanthropy Unbound in 2012 to advise and coach in the development of philanthropic projects and strategies, including program design, landscape mapping, and creating collaborative funds. Notable experience includes her time as the director of Girls and Women Integration at the Clinton Global Initiative of the Clinton Foundation. And before starting her own firm, Renee was a senior philanthropy advisor at the Tides Foundation, where she developed and directed grant-making portfolios in human rights, economic development, and social justice. Additionally, she led and administered the Indigenous Women's Fund, the Africa Family Planning and HIV Integration Fund, where I got to work with her very closely, and the Global Disaster Relief Fund. Welcome, 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 friend. And thank you so very much for agreeing to not just co-author, but also be here tonight to co-moderate.
Oh, thank you, Denise. It is my pleasure. And the hardest part of listening to your bio is it's like, why is it so long? Like, you know, I'm thinking, isn't she done yet? It's just so hard to listen to all those words. But it's such a pleasure to be here. I am so grateful that you asked me to co-author that piece and then also to have this discussion. Thank you.
Right. So let's jump in. I think, but before we jump in, I should say, I kind of alluded to the fact that we worked together when you were at Tides. But I want to tell you, I think that was 2008, 2009. And I remember working with you and being fairly new, to philanthropy at the time for me, and feeling like, wow, like I get to work with Renee. She knows what she's talking about. She cares about my people. She cares about the diaspora. She cares about liberation and freedom. And so I have to just, pause to say thank you to you for everything you gave then and everything you've given since then. And I continue to learn with you and grow with you and be excited to continue to collaborate with you.
I appreciate Denise. I feel exactly the same way. That was a lot. And I feel like we visited like 3 countries in like a week or a week and a half. Like,
yes,
all over Southern Africa. But it was exciting, and a lot of great work happened through that integration fund. And I believe Tide still has it. So really excited.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah, we were definitely in those sub-Saharan streets. We were for sure in the sub-Saharan streets. So great. So, thanks again. But, why don't you share with folks who are watching, how we got together and why we decided to respond to my initial idea to kind of write a piece celebrating Carmen as a leader.
Yeah, no. So that was a moment, like I guess like many that we have when we're just having a conversation. I think we were just having a check-in, sort of catch up, and just wanted to talk about Carmen and how we could talk about the work that she was doing. Because I always, Belafonte, close to my heart, love the work of the Gathering, as well as his other work that he's been doing. And so it was March, and then I was like, why don't we do a piece for Women's History Month? Yep. And highlight Carmen, right? Because we don't have conversations about Chicana leadership in particular. And right. I felt like it was going to be like a Women Crush Wednesday and talk about the philanthropy and talk about the work. But we had decided that like the 28th of March.
Shh, don't. Why are you telling all the business?
It was like, and then we struggled. We were like, we could do that. We could get some pictures. We could do whatever. And then as we started talking and you were telling me so much about the work, and then the intersection just kind of bubbled up for both of us. And this idea of, it's bigger than, love Carmen, think she's great, never met her in person, but I think she's amazing. It's bigger than her. It's bigger than just like this whole conversation around Chicana women's leadership, right? The Chicano kind of movement in general, and how it intersects with the Black movement, and also just BIPOC in general, but yet its own distinct area and subject expertise and knowledge. And so we then decided, hey, let's do something bigger. Let's do this paper. And let's do a call to philanthropy to actually see this as a real area that's connected to the BIPOC work, but has to also be intentionally funded by philanthropy. And so I think we both had an aha moment at the same time and just kind of pulled it together after that, and has received a lot of great recognition. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it. People are excited to talk about it. And then we were able to bring in such great philanthropists or folks from philanthropy to actually also lend like the quotes and conversation to it. So it was great. And it keeps running, right? It has a mind of its own now. It keeps going.
It does. And again, I appreciated that journey, right, of us making decision and shifting and getting bigger and getting broader and thinking broader. And I think, it's not lost on me that, that it's us, the two of us, Black women, who are wanting to bring this to the forefront and have conversation about this. And really, for me, it also was everything that you said around highlighting the work, highlighting Carmen, highlighting a broader issue, but it also is the conversations that I was having with Carmen and some familiar kind of feelings around not, some invisibility, right, of who you are in the sector and kind of what you represent. And that's been familiar, I think, to me as a Black woman in philanthropic spaces from time to time, as someone who already works behind the scenes in many ways. And so it was a conversation and we've had many conversations like that are varied, but I think it really resonated with me and really kicked us into gear. It kicked me into gear. And so I really want to just dive into the conversation. I do want to, shout out and thank both Regina and Cassidy from your team and ours here at the Gathering, who really helped us to, come up with some concepts, do some of the writing, and really helped us to bring this together. I also want to really thank some of the folks who were in the article. And if you haven't read the article and you're wondering what are they talking about, we should we'll drop it into the different chats and the different places where folks are watching. You can find it on the Philanthropy Unbound website, which is philanthropyunbound.org or com. And then you also can find it on the Philanthropy Unbound LinkedIn page as well. But I want to thank all of those who contributed. We had some amazing people in the sector who so graciously contributed. We had Alvin Starks and Albert Maldonado and Latifah Simon, and we had who I'm about to bring and introduce on right now. So thanks so much again, Renee. And yes. I'd like to bring Dr. Aida Hurtado on. Dr. Hurtado is a Lewis Leal Endowed Professor and current faculty member of the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Prior work experience includes working for the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she helped develop the social psychology graduate program with an emphasis on social justice and multidisciplinary methods. Welcome, Dr. Hurtado.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Of course. Thank you. And, I feel like I have to share these short stories, but I just have to thank you for always, showing up for the Gathering for Justice, showing up for Carmen, sharing space with us, teaching us, sharing with us. I feel like every time I'm interacting with you, I not only learn more about ethnic studies and Chicano experience, I also learn more about myself. And so I really appreciate you being in space and in community with us. And I look forward to hearing more from you about this important topic.
Absolutely. I just want to say hello, Dr. Hurtado. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Renee. You sound very impressive to me.
Oh, she is. She is. All right. So Renee, I'll pass it to you to kind of get started with a couple questions that we have for Dr. Hurtado.
Yeah. I guess my first is, we reached out to you just kind of out of the blue, but not really, because you've been in conversations with Denise before. But what made you say yes to participating in this article?
Well, I think there has to be a stronger partnership between those of us that are in the academy. And I always tell my students, your parents' taxes pay my salary. And my job is to read a lot, to think a lot, and then go back to your parents and to our communities and say, these are some potential solutions, that we can all partner on. And so I feel that your work really fuels my work and vice versa. So I am very honored anytime you ask me to do something, even if it's somewhat tangential to my expertise. I always try to find a dovetail where I can offer something. And it was interesting working on the article or answering your questions about the article, because I worked with the Kellogg Foundation on youth programming, and I work with the Rockefeller Foundation on various initiatives on immigration. And your article really expressed the feelings I had, but I could not articulate why that work was so uncomfortable and why I felt like the conversation in these meetings with these foundations that were doling out a lot of money were slightly off target. And that every time I talk to Carmen and every time I, participate in Nana's work, I just feel like, oh my God, if they only had the money, right? Because they're right on target, but that's not what, in my experience, in these conversations that I had with foundations, those were not the issues that were being addressed. And so your article was just like, oh my God, yes, this is what we need. This is a rethinking of philanthropy. It's a call to action. And so I just felt very honored to be asked to put in my little grain of sand into the pile.
It was more than just a little. It was actually extremely, extremely helpful as I read you. And, we only put in a bit of what, just because we asked you all the questions, right? And only put in your responses to maybe 2, right, out of 10. Right. And so me just reading your responses, I got a whole different view and perspective of the work and what needs to be the work. And so if you could just talk a little bit about why it's so important that this piece of work gets funded, inclusive of the BIPOC work, but then also as its own entity, as its own piece.
Well, I think that, first of all, I feel like we're incredibly numerous. So if you look at the Southwest, and not only the Southwest anymore, we're a national population, right? There's a significant number of Mexican descent Latinos in New York, in the Midwest, now in the East Coast, all parts of the East Coast. And basically, we're a migrant population where we go where the jobs are. And so although our origins are primarily in the Southwest and obviously with the border with US Mexico, all of us have a history. Well, most of us are first generation in college. And I always joke that not only first generation in college, but first generation high school many times. And so that we all migrated for jobs to different parts of the country. And so even though we're very widespread, we're not real obvious. Our histories are not obvious. I think that's been the struggle in the last 10 years to get ethnic studies in K through 12, because, Carmen often relates how a lot of her history, a lot of what motivated her activism, she didn't come into knowledge of it until college. And so the fact that we're so invisible and that it's a complicated history, because we're not immigrants per se, because many of our ancestors were already in what is almost half of the United States. And then our racial mixture, as Nane said in your article, he has indigenous background, that gets mixed in with our colonization of the Spanish and the French. So it becomes a very complicated. We're like the example of hybrids in every sense of the word. And then at the same time, we do have this entity that's very identity and history that's very cohesive, but complicated. And that complication doesn't lend itself to like easy solutions or clean solutions or a variable approach, like give me the one thing that's going to make Latinos go to college. And you go, it depends. And as soon as you say it depends, philanthropy, like the foundation's eyes just glaze over. Just give me the 3 things I need to do. And I think I'm working on a new concept that it has been inspired by Carmen's work, which I call relational leadership, right? And relational leadership is about taking the core of the issues in a relational way rather than an absolute way. And so that it becomes you always go, it depends. If they ask you a question, you always go, it depends. And so you have to have the patience to wait to get a complicated explanation for how it is that we look for solutions. But I think we have a lot of good tools. I think we have educated now 2 or 3 generations of students. I think that a lot of the people on this call are a product of that education and of that experience. So we're getting there. We're getting there.
Awesome. Thank you. Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah.
I won't monopolize the time.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hurtado. And I think, I want to take that, what you touched on a little bit further when you talk about, really the intersections that kind of Chicanas and Chicanos kind of hold. So if you could share, how those intersections, particularly for Chicano and Chicana leaders, affect kind of the difficulty of being seen even as a leader, and how it, particularly in the lens that most leadership models are oriented, right? When we talk about Black, Indigenous, people of color, that's it can be very binary. It could be there's not a lot of intersection there. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that if you take the different dimensions of difference, let's say like gender, right? And so we feel very comfortable even now, even though the conversation has gotten more complicated, but including trans folks in the conversation, that's a very new conversation. It was always women's, issues, or even the initiative that President Obama had on making young men successful. That was like a total controversy because it didn't deal with the complexities of how gender intersects with the criminal justice system. And so that we Chicanos, I think, and Chicanas sort of represent that intersectionality to the max. so that some of us are immigrants, but some of us are not. Some of us are parents who were immigrants, but were, first generation in the US. Some of us speak English and Spanish. Some of us use a hybrid of English and Spanish. Some of us only speak English. Some of us only speak Spanish. And all of that, it means that you have to be very targeted in your interventions, and you have to be very flexible, because of these intersections are very much in the lived experiences of the Chicana and Chicano community. And if we're committed to an inclusive leadership, it means that you're not going to ignore, for the sake of efficiency, any intersection, right? That you're going to honor the complexity of this population. And so therefore, it's very difficult to then present a clean little picture for funding agencies of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so I think we need much more flexible, much more mobile, much more relational paradigms of issues, so that we can apply those kinds of solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think, before we kind of move to the next segment, I wanted to talk to you a little about, and you've talked a little bit about Carmen. You've known Carmen since she was a student in your class. You've seen her and watched her grow and change and evolve. So how have you seen Carmen's leadership evolve over the years to really manifest kind of greater levels of solidarity and community building work, particularly between Black and Chicano, Latinx people, but also women, other communities? What have you witnessed, and how have you seen the evolution of that leadership?
Well, I have to say that the seeds of that leadership were always there. I always joke about, whenever I introduce her, that she was one of the most outspoken KG students I ever had in my class. She was always challenging me and posing the unusual question. And sort of pushing the boundaries of whatever argument I was presenting, which I think is the seeds of growth, right? If you have that lens and that perspective, that means that you're going to be open to other more complicated views as they emerge. And I also think that she's always been very grounded in terms of practice. So I think a lot of her development has come from experiencing moving from California to the East Coast, where the populations there are very different, where the issues are different. They're urban issues. They're solidarity issues, mostly with Blacks and with other constituencies, Puerto Ricans, and that her ability to sort of not be close-minded, but actually always have been open-minded since I've known her. It means that she can grow and she can learn. And I think that she's also just, seeing, I always get a real kick. It makes me teary-eyed. I get a real kick of her interacting with Nane, because I think of Nane and her as being very spiritually grounded. And I think when you're spiritually grounded, there's a commitment not to hurt. There's a commitment not to exclude. There's a commitment to alleviate whatever suffering you see. And if that's your lens, then you're gonna grow. You're going to find ways to include those that were not included before. And so it's a beautiful thing to go from being the teacher to then being the student. So I feel like I become a student of her leadership. When I'm not sure I was her teacher when she was in my classroom, but it definitely, I have learned so much from seeing her grow and struggle. And when you're an activist, your feet are put to the ground every day. You're challenged every day. You're questioned every day. And she's a fighter. She does not go and hide, but she takes those challenges and is very thoughtful and very spiritually grounded. And so therefore she's an innovative sort of, so what would you call it? Like an inspired leader, and she has a good role model in Nane, because I think of him as being the same as having that same lens as Carmen does.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely, Carmen has, so fortunate to have Mr. Nane Mr. B and others who have really sewn into her and her leadership. And I love hearing you talk about, learning also now from her. I think, I hear her say that too about some of the young people that she's cultivating, right? That she's learning from them. And so I think that too speaks to the type of, model of leadership that all of them come from. So thank you so much, Dr. Hurtado. I hope that you will, or you're able to stick around a little bit and come back towards the end. And also, Renee, thank you so much for being a part of this first segment. I think you're gonna go away for a minute and come back for the next segment, but I appreciate you both. And so, we'd like to bring into the conversation, a group of people whose names you've heard a lot now, and a group of leaders who can both, personally and or professionally expand on what we've already started to discuss here with Dr. Hurtado. So first, I'd like to welcome Carmen Perez Jordan, who is the president and CEO of the Gathering for Justice, and who we've heard her name several times now. I'd like to also bring Mr. Nane Alejandres, who is one of Carmen's mentors and the founder of Barrios Unidos in Santa Cruz, California, an institute for peace and restorative justice that runs critical programs inside California's prisons. And finally, we have Chris Putnam Walkerly of Putnam Consulting, a trusted advisor to the world's leading philanthropists for more than 20 years. Chris is the author of Delusional Altruism: Why Philanthropists Fail to Achieve Change and What They Can Do to Transform Giving. And she recently authored an article for Forbes magazine about our friend and elder Danny Glover, Uncle Danny, and his work with Mr. Nane's organization, Barrios Unidos. So welcome to Carmen, Nane, and Chris.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So I want to start with you, Carmen. But before I pose this first question, I want to read a quote from the article that Renee and I co-authored, and we'll get your reaction to that, and then I'll have a question for you as well. So this quote is from Alvin Starks, who is the director of the Open Society US Equality Team at Open Society Foundations. It says, Chicana leadership is vitally important for many reasons. One, it is a leadership identity that disrupts narrowly defined notions of who gets to set the rules and articulate our ideals of freedom and justice. Most Americans, North and South, have been undereducated towards understanding the importance of Chicana leadership towards contributing to the gender justice, racial equity, and immigration movements that are literally the backdrop of the current social issues we are addressing today. Secondly, there is an invaluable intersectional analysis that is based on lived experiences that can be propelled by Chicana leadership, and it allows for a deeper analysis that can secure long-term justice. Our social justice movements need a fresh approach to counter the vestiges of long-term discrimination that continue to dominate our communities, and elevating the perspective of Chicana leadership provides a critical approach. End of the quote. So yeah, I found that quote so powerful. I think Alvin is a friend of the Gathering for Justice, but also is just someone who's been in this work for so long. So, what is that quote mean to you, and how does that make you feel? I think I'll start there, and then I'll jump into a couple of other questions that I have for you, just about how philanthropy can support organizations that are led by Chicanos and Chicanas.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank you and Renee for co-authoring this important article, especially, as a Chicana feeling so invisible when philanthropy is funding BIPOC communities. yet not funding Chicano leaders. I remember the conversation I had with you in one of our check-ins, and then months later, you send me the article, and I just started crying. And I was like, somebody was listening. But that's what you do, Danice. You listen, and you listen deeply. And so I just want to thank you. I'm also really honored to be here with my mentor, Nane, as well as you, Chris. And I just want to say, for the record, to my professor, Dr. Hurtado, that the Women's March was a gift back to you, grounded in Chicana intersectional feminism, because of what you did for me at UC Santa Cruz. And so I say that all the time, but I don't know if I've ever actually said it to you. I know that I was very rough around the edges at UC Santa Cruz. But you were the first professor I've ever seen in my life actually look like me and talk like me, and have a sibling who was impacted by incarceration have the same experience as me. And I used to be so insecure by your presence, because I thought, you didn't like me, but there was an expectation of me to be great because you saw something in me. And so I just wanted to say that. I feel that this quote says so many things that I don't think I've ever really been able to articulate. When I hear, the fact that Chicana leadership disrupts narrowly defined notions, I believe is the same thing that I try to say to you when I try to share that I cannot be put in a box, right? I don't want to be put in a silo issue. We constantly in the movement talk about dismantling the systems of oppression and removing this racial binary, yet we also feed into it when we're funding or we're selecting leadership. We select leadership really based on who is hot at the time. And so it's never been me, because of the fact that I am the hybrid of all these different identities, being Chicana, understanding that we come from indigenous and Black blood, but are also colonized, right? And this assumption as a Latina or a Latinx person that I have to work in immigration. And although immigration is very important, the world tells you that you have to work on that issue. And it completely silences those of us that didn't cross the border, but the border crossed us. And so seeing this and to hear the words from Alvin say that Chicana leadership is vitally important for many reasons, just allows me to begin to feel as though I'm being heard. Because in many spaces, yes, and I love what Aida talked about, relational leadership. I believe that everything that we do is at the center of transformational relationships. It's building those long-term relationships that are not just transactional, but actually trying to invite people to come in, understanding that there's a lane for everybody. I know I say that all the time to the team as it pertains to Mr. Belafonte teaching us that. But, for many years, I felt like my purpose was to do the work. And as long as I did the work, the funding would come. But in my 25th year, not only do I see myself begging to fund the gathering, but I also see my mentor, Nane, who just turns the young year of 33 plus, 32 plus, also go out and ask for an investment in his work and in his organization. And I had conversations with Nane where I said, I can't do what you do. I don't want to be, the young age of and have to feel like I'm still asking for an investment in me and in my community. I work at the intersection of justice reform, police brutality, deportation, violence prevention, racial justice, Black and Brown solidarity, Indigenous rights, we work at the intersection of building multiracial coalitions that allow all these issues to exist. But because of the fact that I don't fit a box, I'm always overlooked. And so I don't want to get emotional because I got emotional the other night, and I feel like this whole week has just been really emotional. But I just want to say thank you. And what you all did is the relationship between Black radical feminists and Chicana feminists, right? That, we were able to show up with our whole selves because of the work that you all did. And it was you Black women that said, hey, we also need to pay attention to our Chicano leaders. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And thank you for commissioning all these amazing people to share how important it is for philanthropy to invest in us, but not just philanthropy, but for others leaders to also see us as leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carmen. And yeah, I think you touched on so many points that, we're coming up in some of the next questions that I had. So I'll leave with you with this question around, and you talked a little bit about having observed Nane, right, over Mr. Nane over the years, but what have you learned and observed from Mr. Nane and other Chicana leaders about how intersectional leadership can often be underrepresented and underfunded in philanthropic spaces?
I feel, well, first of all, I just have to say, like, Nane is the embodiment of servant leadership. And I believe that is not just a concept or an ideology that maybe somebody like Robert Greenleaf introduced, right? But it's part of our culture. It's part of our cultural identity to serve. I remember when I was a child, my mother used to ask me to pray to God to give me the gift of serving. Yet Nane does that every single day of his life, being the CEO. But what I've learned about him is that Nane will take out the trash. Meanwhile, he is supposed to be out doing a keynote presentation somewhere. And Nane is the person that is cultivating leadership every single day. And that is a gift in itself. And it has a lot to do with his ability to provide a space, a home for those of us who have a lot of pain to actually heal and transform that pain into gifts to share with the world. And you can't quantify that, right? There is no data on being able to change lives. And so Nane does the healing work, but that's sometimes not good enough for the philanthropist, right? Or the foundation who needs to know how many people you served, how many jobs did you get them? How many this, how many that? And so what I often see is I see individuals and organizations who don't have the deep and major impact that Barrios Unidos and Nane have on human beings, and particularly in our communities, whether it's in the barrios of Santa Cruz or within the Valley of the Beast in prisons. There's no access to money, and there's no access to tables. And oftentimes when folks are meeting with major elected officials or even the White House, there's no mention of Nane and his work, right? But yet we often talk about Black and brown, yet oftentimes the brown is left out. And so what I will say about Nane is that Nane is somebody who will keep getting up every single day and, I know he talks about, transitioning into another role, but Nane is a very unique human being that I think can never be replaced, and models what it means to be an intersectional leader in this time. And the other day it was funny because I called him like the young Cesar Chavez, and he started laughing. But all that to say is just, it's truly an honor to be under the mentorship and leadership, because what people don't understand is that as philanthropy is also exploring at how do we create a safe space for leaders, Nane is already doing that, right? Nane is the person that leaders call for advice. Those of us that need to make major decisions in our lives, he is that. And so if we paid attention a little bit more to the things that folks like Nane and other Chicano leaders are doing with medicine and with healing and with counsel and elders and intergenerational relationships, and youth rites of passage, then that's the recipe for building the beloved community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Carmen, for sharing. And I think this is you'll stick around as well and come back at the end and stick around for the rest of this bit. But I really appreciate you sharing with us about your experience. And we do see you, I see you, and we'll continue to have uplift this conversation. So I think this was a good segue to bring you in, Chris. As I mentioned in your introduction, you recently wrote a Forbes piece that highlighted the important work of Mr. Nane and Barrios Unidos. It was called Danny Glover's Social Justice Secret: Organizations like Barrios Unidos Make the Difference. And it was such a great piece, and it touched on a number of things. It touched on the long relationship that Mr. Nane has had with both our founder, Mr. B, and of course with Uncle Danny. And it talked about his decades long support of Mr. Nane's work, and the incredible work of a 40-year-old institution, Barrios Unidos. So, if you could discuss kind of how that piece came about and what it was what was it intended to provide for the readers. And after you share that, I'm going to read a little quote and then ask you a more specific question.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I apologize for the weird lighting happening. I realized I've never had a webinar or a conversation on Zoom that has been this late in the evening in the East Coast. And I have a whole sunshine thing happening. But anyway, it's sort of in the light and the shadows, which might be a theme for today. But, the article in Forbes came about for a variety of reasons. I've known Nane and Barrios Unidos for over 25 years, since I was working at Stanford, actually evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs for the California Wellness Foundation's Violence Prevention Initiative, and had the fortune and the privilege, really, of being pulled into Nane with his open arms and into his circle. And so, recently was just trying to see how I could be helpful to him. And I think the impetus really was a conversation I had with a corporate funder that I was talking to, who, after the murder of George Floyd, the company decided it wanted to commit an extra significant amount of funding toward racial justice and social justice organizations. And, above and beyond their kind of normal funding areas, but, felt deeply committed to this as an important issue, and asked for my advice. And I encouraged them to support grassroots organizations working in community, Black-led, Latino-led, Chicana-led organizations. And their response was like, yeah, but no. And it really, it's a national, it's a global company, and they really wanted to focus on more safe national organizations and nationally known organizations that they, for a variety of reasons, felt more comfortable funding. Now, these are all really good organizations that they were funding, but to me, it spoke volumes to the problem in philanthropy of all the reasons why organizations like The Gathering, like Barrios Unidos, and other Chicana-led organizations don't get the funding that they need and don't get the support and recognition that they need. And, it's a long list. We could probably have a whole conversation about why, but I mean, some of the reasons are, as Carmen mentioned, kind of the transactional versus the transformational nature of philanthropy, and kind of focusing on making the grant as opposed to creating the systemic changes that are needed. It's a lack of awareness on so many levels. I mean, on the level of, understanding institutionalized racism in this country, even understanding what kinds of organizations, the value of supporting grassroots, community-based, Chicana-led organizations, understanding Chicana versus Latina. I mean, that's not on the radar screen of a lot of funders, right? So there's so many things challenging it, organizations that don't fit into the neat boxes. I mean, Carmen gave a great explanation of the wide variety of the types of work that they're doing and the intersectionality of that and how it needs to be holistic in their work. But the funding boxes don't quite work because a lot of funders, fund in silos. A lot of funders have a scarcity mindset and really aren't willing to make the investments that are needed to create truly transformational change in organizations and communities, by limiting funding, not providing funding for overhead, one-year grants, project support versus capacity building and general operating support, and just really not recognizing the transformational work being done by these organizations and leaders, the emotional effort that goes into it, day in and day out, the exhaustion that people are feeling, and the importance of sustaining these organizations, these institutions, and these leaders in communities. And so this kind of scarcity mindset holds them back. And, fear of taking risks, fear of, funding organizations that they are less familiar with. And so there's so much really that goes into the lack of funding for organizations.
Yeah, and I found it interesting because, we tried to touch on some of that in the piece that we wrote as well. And I saw, that you touched a lot of it on in your piece, as well. And, it's interesting, hearing, so I want to read a quote, but, hearing how long you've known, right, Mr. Nane, how long, how much you have been in support of his work, and knowing that this many years later still something that we're trying to bring to the forefront, is alarming in some ways. But I want to read this quote and kind of ask you a final question. And it says, and just as Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos takes the long view, Glover's support is not short-term or seasonal. It doesn't fit into a neat and tidy grant-making box. He advances change by centering and supporting cultural leadership rooted in communities across decades and generations, and by supporting work and people who are consistently underfunded and overlooked by traditional philanthropy. He's helping to make inroads on almost every condition philanthropy struggles to improve, from food security to health, community building to systems change. So, knowing what right, and you've talked a little bit about it now, but also like what has been learned. What are you learning still about the process? Through the process of writing this article, through the process of being in community and relationship with Mr. Nane, about philanthropy support of Chicana and Chicano leadership, and of really work at the intersections, right? So intersectional work and intersectional organizations that these leaders often lead.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. One is, I wanted to highlight and profile Danny Glover's work and his relationship with Barrios, for a variety of reasons. One, I mean, it would get people's attention and kind of help signal the importance, for folks who, Danny Glover, who know him through watching Lethal Weapon, to help them recognize that this is a person who supports Barrios and organizations like Barrios and Nane, but also, that his activism predated his acting career. And so recognizing that this is a man who's the real deal in terms of his support.
Yeah.
And but also, that I think donors also need to recognize, and funders, that they bring more than money. And Danny Glover, he supports Barrios, but also is there at events. He's there at the prison where Nane is going to meet with prisoners and support them and meeting with them and talking with them. And so he brings his full self. And I think that's an important lesson for funders, is that you're more than money, and you can think about the relationships you have and the assets that you bring as well. But also, I think, I guess what I've learned, in doing the article, one of the stories that really sticks out for me about the value of Nane's leadership and Barrios Unidos and Carmen and the Gathering, Nane is a person who, he works in like prison reform, and that might be, sort of helping people who are incarcerated and reentry. And those might be buzzwords that philanthropy hears and supports criminal justice reform. But, he's negotiated relationships with the California state prison system to work in prisons. He has relationships with the prison leadership, state prisons, which will allow him to, in his organization and his team, to come in and meet with prisoners and provide support to them inside, people who are incarcerated inside. And those who are incarcerated want to talk to him, right? So he has relationships with people who are incarcerated in state prisons. And when those individuals are released and coming back into community and into society, he has relationships with community members in those communities to help support that successful reentry. And to me, if you just think about the relationships that takes, the relationship building on so many different levels, community-based, inside prisons, and at the state level, that's remarkable, I think. And so I don't think funders recognize like how much work goes into that, decades of relationship building, decades of showing up, of being there. And you don't just create that, right? You don't just train someone to do that. And so to me, it's really the importance of sustaining organizations like The Gathering, like Barrios Unidos, for the long term, across generation, supporting the intergenerational work and community-based work that's happening, and that intersectional work that's happening, but also thinking about long-term sustainability. Barrios has been around for 40 years. What about the next 40 years and the next 40 years? And really thinking long-term. I think that's really important and needed.
Right. Thank you so much, Chris. And you touched on so many important issues, both here and in the article. And again, I encourage everyone, and we should have dropped it in all of the chats and shared it with everyone, to both look at the article in Forbes, and also Chris's book as well. But I want to transition to you, Mr. Nane, and Chris, please, stay on, and if you're able to, and join us towards the end when we talk a little bit about call to action, if you're able. But Mr. Nane, first of all, I want to say I want to hold some space. I know that your community right now is grieving, right, the loss of a young person, and so I want to make sure that we name that and hold space for that. And I also, just want to thank you, like I've thanked others, for always, showing up and being here for Carmen, for The Gathering, and continuing to share your wisdom, share space, and grow along with us. And happy birthday.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think I have some of the similar questions that I had for Carmen for you, and also want to leave it open for you to kind of respond to some of the things that you've heard. But, you know, as an intersectional Chicano leader that really is working, you know, working at a power building organization with multi-ethnic and multicultural marginalized people, in particular with our siblings that are in prisons throughout California. You know, what has it meant to you to see and to hear, you know, both Chris's article and Renee and my article as well, and seeing how it's sparked this important conversation? What has that meant for you?
Well, thank you for giving space. Blessings to everyone. First and foremost is that we lost a young life yesterday at a high school, you know, in school, and having to go back at this time back to school and to face that. We lost a life, but we also lost two other lives, a 14 and a 17-year-old. They got arrested, and probably will even the lost chain will be tried to try them as adults, and if convicted, will be in prison for a long time. And as I'm going through right now and finding the words to let people know and what action are we going to take, what should we do, is that who's going to be there 25, 30 years from now when this 14-year-old goes for parole, or just saying, you know, because my experience says that this is how much time they're going to be incarcerated. Maybe now a little bit shorter with all the gains that we've done, but we're about to lose that too with this if we lose this recall. But and I think it says a lot in terms of where we're at as Chicano community. That we're and hopefully that this Friday there'll be enough people out there to bring up the spirit of these young people that are caught up in this. But you know, a few months back, there was two young people killed, and another one almost killed, same day in same city. Nobody showed up. Nobody was able to get up and go to the street or anything. If that would have happened in the Black community, there would have been something happening. And we have a lot to learn. And we were inspired by movements in the Black community to move on. Although our community has historically been involved in things, but in terms of you bring it to in the last 50 years or so, that the Black community has tremendously supported us in bringing those issues and giving us side by side. So I want to open in that respect. I think that when we just let it go by and don't say anything, then we're part of it. We're now. Some people don't want to say anything because they're afraid to get green lighted, and I always tell them that if we're afraid to get green lighted when we speak against violence within our own people, then we shouldn't be doing this work. We shouldn't be afraid of our own children. And so having the relationship with such incredible people like Mr. B and Danny Glover and Carlos and Dolores Huerta, and having met so many folks from books, people that I read in books, being with Mr. B throughout the South, throughout all the United States, international, meeting with Hugo Chavez and speaking at the United Nations in Switzerland, being in with Danny Glover in Tanzania and Mr. B in Kenya, you know, in the battlefields of Nicaragua with our Nicaraguan brothers, and in the coffee fields of Colombia, and being in Venezuela was when we met with Hugo Chavez, and the times that we went there, we spent going to the prisons and seeing everything. And you look at, and I'm laying this because I think Aida said it real clear in terms of where Chicanismo and came from and where we're at, and And how does that relate to now? And I'll get to the article and stuff, but I just want to, Chicano, when we say Chicano is to me, I mean, it just sparks my blood, man. It just says something. It's like when I imagine what it felt in the 60s when a young Black man, all of a sudden was Black power, and you saw that spirit that something lighted up in them. But when I first heard Chicano, it really hit me. And then when I heard it, it was from my grandfather. And then I heard it from my father. And so it's not a new term. It's been around. It was never really brought to the limelight to the Chicano movement in the 60s. And our great leader, Luis Valdez, I think I heard him explain the best way to explain what Chicano means when he heard Corky Gonzalez out of Denver, Colorado, talk about Chicanismo, what Chicano was. So we come from a history of warriors, a history of medicine people. And when you start to work in your communities, and it's just it's not like like you said, well, I want to grow up and work for a nonprofit. It's just a way of life. And if you're a ceremonial people, that's the way you're brought up. You're brought up and then there's the vida loca within the neighborhood that you grow up also with, and identifying yourself as a Chicano brings a lot of spirit. But when you meet young people like Carmen, and as Aida also said, there was a seed already there. We just needed to water it. And when you water it and you start to see it bloom, you just kind of lay back and you watch it grow. It's like, you're going like, wow. She was sitting right here in this carpet right here, and now for me to be here and say, I'm invited by Carmen and you all to speak here. It's like it's like every organizer. This is what Martin Luther King wanted to see. This is like Abernathy wanted to see. This is what Mr. B wanted to see. Dolores Huerta. We wanted to see you all stand up and be your own and have your own mind and contribute to the betterment of this world. And that's what Carmen represents to me and to us here, because everybody, there's other people that are listening to Carmen, will be listening to Carmen. There's people that hear that talk about Carmen, that Carmen inspires them without her even knowing it. And the way she's not saying, well, how many people are looking at me? I mean, it's not that way, because I'm that same way. I have a lot of people tell me, what, Nani, man, you came to speak at Juvenile Hall, and you really inspired me. And that was like 20 years ago, 25 years. I haven't been in a juvenile hall like that in a long time. But you inspire people. You don't know how long it's going to take for that flower to grow. And so you keep watering it. And all of a sudden you see all these people throughout the country. And I am blessed. I am blessed that I have so many young people that I can call on, And it's not about serving thousands, like Chris was talking about. The foundations want to know, how many did you serve? I mean, I always tell people, we don't serve thousands, we serve hundreds. But those hundreds and those 10 and those 5, they go out and serve others. And so it's hard to pinpoint that to a report, to a foundation. And at the same time, I'm going like, why do I have to explain every 6 months what the heck I'm doing? Why don't you come and spend a day here and walk with us? I tell my relatives, if you're going to go to the prisons and do some work with individuals in prisons, don't go in there for one time and tell them you're going to go do all this and walk away and never see them again, or not even walk within that space. What I've learned is that was these relatives, when you walk with them inside and you walk with them outside, then man, nobody can come close to you, because they'll give their life up for you. And I have those warriors. I don't call them upon for that, because that's not the leadership that we're growing here. but it's just in terms of coming from the 60s and the 70s, where there was violence and there was all that stuff happening, and you had to do certain things. That's my teacher. I have a photo of my leader here, Catarina Hurtado. And that was the way it was, through the brown berets and stuff, you carried a weapon, I did not like that kind of leadership, I wanted something different. And that's where Cesar Chavez came into my life and spoke about nonviolence, and Martin Luther King and Gandhi stuff. And in 1977, I almost killed a man. And that day, when I got out of that case, I decided that I should really try to be a nonviolent person. And it's been a journey like that, to undo everything that was there, all my isms, to try to get rid of them and work for a better place where I could, years later, I can sit with Chris Putnam and tell her our dreams, and tell her what understanding that she had something that could help us to relay the message, that we could not only just speak to Latino prisoners or Black prisoners, we had to talk to all prisoners. And I don't like to call them prisoners, I call them relatives, but to speak to all our relatives about change, and change in the belly of the beast. And all these years we did all that work, it was on our own dime, because philanthropy was not funding that. Philanthropy didn't see that. When we said spiritual, they thought we were talking about religion. So it took a while for them to understand that there's a difference there. And if you're spiritually grounded, that's the kind of work you're going to do. So the articles, your articles, your article on Chicano and philanthropy really touched something in it. We just don't have enough time to talk about all the stuff that needs to be done, and call on the names of those philanthropists, and our own people, Black and brown, that are in there, that think it's their money, and they're holding, and they even hold you to a higher standard, because they said, well, we got to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Puro pedo, because you're not doing that. But you are securing yourself a little something. So when you spend 4 or 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in that philanthropy, you're going to have something. Well, the folks in the streets, they're not going to have anything, because you don't give them enough to put aside. Most of us work around here without no health benefits. I'm lucky. I'm a Vietnam veteran, so I do have through the VA, but most of the stuff we can't afford it. Right. And let me just say on Chris. To be in an article with Danny Glover is amazing, but to be in an article, in the same article that way, with a mentee that, she's my mentor now, she's my boss, she's on the board of directors of Bares Unidos, so she could fire me anytime. So that is amazing. That is it is homegrown. And you don't have to get very philosophical about it. You just do it. And that's what Carmen does. I can depend on Carmen when I call her up and say, you know what, we got to do this, niece. And it's going to get done. So
that's right.
Yeah. So
well, Mr. Nane, I appreciate you so much. And I can speak for those, I think, that are on here that know you, that and just giving our gratitude for the love that you show, the leadership that you continue to show, the care that you've given so many people. We're grateful for you and the work that you're doing. We need to move to the next segment, but I hope you two will hold on to the end, and we'll come back for just a moment for each of you all to share. So thank you so much, Nane, and thank you so much, Chris. And I'll say goodbye to you all for now, and bring up the folks who will be on our last segment. And thank you for your patience as we learned, right? And got to hear from Mr. Nane. So I want to bring back Renee. Hey, Renee. And as Renee will be leading this next segment, but I'm going to introduce everyone. So please first welcome Dr. Jessica Barron. Jessica is a senior consultant for Frontline Solutions, a multidisciplinary strategic planning firm who advises organizations and nonprofits. Jessica is an author and demographer dedicated to racial and gender equity. Her work is published and awarded across the academic and philanthropic sectors, and she holds a PhD in sociology from Texas A&M University. Welcome, Jessica. And we're also happy to bring Jasmine Chavez, the Associate Vice President of Hispanics in Philanthropy, whose mission is to strengthen Latino communities by increasing resources for the Latino and Latin American civil sector, by increasing Latino participation and leadership throughout the field of philanthropy, and by fostering policy change to enhance equity and inclusiveness. And last and certainly but not least is Jasmine Delafoss. Jasmine is the senior regional organizer here at the Gathering for Justice, holding down California and doing great work, not just in California, but all across the country. So welcome, Jasmine, and welcome all of you. And I will hand it to you, Renee.
Thank you, Denise. And thank you all for joining us and continue to join us. And also, I want to start out by saying, Mr. Nene, that was a word. I caught every bit of it. I hope that our audience also heard what you were saying. There were so many jewels and gems from everyone on that panel during that conversation. So thank you all so much. But I am so happy to be in conversation with you all, Jessica, Jasmine, and Yasmin. And I hope to have a fruitful conversation. We could dig a little deeper into philanthropy and what we're seeing and how we can bridge that intersectional gap. So I want to start with you, Jasmine. Being in California, we know California has a large Chicano, Latino, Latina, and Latinx community. And so want to hear a little bit from you about the intersectionality and your experience in working with and addressing intersectional areas, and any data you can share about California and the work that they're doing or is happening in California around intersectionality.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So honored to be here with you all and all of those who spoke before. I mean, California is such a beautiful state that has so many different complex, issues. And what we know about California is that Latinos and Asians are the fastest growing population, and also misrepresented in the data because we know that the lack of data around data disaggregation doesn't really help us capture the realities of what we're facing in California. Obviously thankful for census being recaptured, but it still doesn't capture all of the voices and identities of our communities. We know that California Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in the state of California, with a population of over 15 million people. And we know that one of the things that we know is that philanthropic funders only fund 1% of Latino-led organizations, as well as Asian Pacific Islander organizations. And that has a tremendous impact on the way we look at the state. And so one of the things is that, foundations and philanthropy has to really understand that our lives truly depend on it. And that by investing in Latino-led organizations and Black organizations and BIPOC organizations, it will help us build a more equitable California across all sectors. And so I grew up in Stockton, California, one of the most racially and ethnically diverse cities in the United States, according to, the US reports saying that, we're the most diverse. But I think growing up in that community, I grew up with all different races and backgrounds that you can imagine. And what we understood is that pretty much across the state of California, We know that Latinos and Chicanos represent nearly 40% of our population across the board. And so when we think about the percentages of those who are leading organizations or receiving funding for these organizations, again, are slim to none. And so I think one of the things that we see are so many different barriers, I think, as mentioned before, where we isolate these different organizations to be like, you could only be funded for immigration work or criminal justice work. And I think in our report, or in the article you all wrote very eloquently, speaks to the importance of sort of breaking down those different barriers. And I think right now leaders are calling for philanthropy to recognize that we can't live in this siloed way of funding, and it's the opportunity for us to really have a reckoning in philanthropy to say we have to really reshift the way. And so I think those are some of the experiences that a lot of leaders are facing, and we've seen it especially in the last year during the pandemic, where leaders are, having to resource, our already small buckets of funding to make rice and beans out of nothing that we had to serve hundreds of more people during this crisis. And we've seen more than ever that when you give organizations like ours and other, BIPOC community organizations like the Trust, we actually see that they're more fruitful in the work that they do, and it's more sustaining. So I'll stop because there's so many other great speakers that I want to hear from. But I think those are some of the experiences that we're seeing in our work right now.
No, that's great. And actually, I just want to double down on one thing you said. Are you hearing from funders? Are they mentioning Chicana? Are they talking about intersectionality? Are you getting any of that at all in conversations with funders?
I think funders are beginning to have sort of this reckoning, but it's not happening enough, and it's not happening fast enough. I think I've had the great opportunity of, being a part of the California Endowment's President's Council, where I actually get to sit with Dr. Ross and the board and really push them to talk about how do we really grapple with making sure that funders can actually fund, these different BIPOC-led organizations. We've seen folks make like these one-time big 5-year investments, but that's not sustainable, right? And so we need foundations to really think about a long-term strategy that will help sustain the work. And while these, 5-year lump sum of, millions of dollars is great, it doesn't actually help us keep the commitment forward in years to come. And it doesn't help us build the infrastructure strong enough to continue to do the work. And so I think that there are some social justice movement funders that get it, but I think that the other private sector foundations and some of the other non-traditional funders are not there yet. And we have to work and have foundations use their influence and networks to help build that, because it's not happening and we don't see it happening enough across. And so that's been my experience. I don't think it's happening enough, and I think it needs to happen a lot more.
Okay, thank you. Jasmine, I have a similar question for you, given the spaces that you're in, right, and being able to interact with funders. Do you see funders actually having those intersectional conversations, and what does that look like, if so?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Renee. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everybody, the Gathering for Justin, Denise, and everybody. It's a really great panel, such a great discussion tonight. I feel like I'm in a really interesting position because I am, I'm Hispanics in Philanthropy. I am a funder. I'm here in the room with you all, and in my perspective, I think I'm fortunate because within my organization, I lead the racial equity portfolio work, and I sit with our new team actually around multiracial democracy building, or also power building and justice. And so in these conversations and in my spaces, the intersectionality in these conversations are happening, and we are bringing them to the table in terms of having people understand that. I think it goes back with what Dr. Aida Hurtado said, like, at least for HIP, we are very much focused more on like a relational leadership perspective. We've spent, I think, under the leadership of Ana Mari, the last couple of years of just listening for a really long time. And I think if anything that the pandemic has taught us this last year is, as funders, intersectionality was seen at every aspect of what the pandemic did to our communities, right? It wasn't one system that failed us. It was a breakdown of multiple systems that failed our communities. And we saw we saw private nonprofits stepping in where the sectors couldn't keep up. We saw the rise of mutual aid groups coming in to be able to sustain our communities in a way that our government and our systems failed us. And so for us, these conversations are beginning to happen. We had already been started to have these conversations. And I think that they're definitely continuing in the sense of we're not going back to what was, and we have to continue moving forward and funding intersectional work, because that's what our community has been saying. And I think as like Chicanas and Latinx identities, we understand that very deeply, that, we're not impacted by one thing. Our lives are impacted by multiple issues all the time as mujeres, as Chicanas, as, cisgendered, bigender, communities. There's different impacts to the work that we can't isolate it. And we also can't work in isolation and in silos of what's happening to our partners in other communities. And so, at least for us, we are seeing a response around philanthropy, but it's still a gigantic beast of a system to get to move. And so you definitely see big funders. I think Borealis, it really started trying to do something, even though it's not perfect. You have the great partners out of Change Philanthropy. You have, the incredible curriculum. And I think part of the work too is, as philanthropic organizations, it can also be performative. And so you really have to look at the work that was being led by Equity in the Center from Awake to Woke to Work, where some of that work has to happen internally. And I think we've seen organizations do that. And now we're coming out into the external part of what are we doing to actually fund this work, and not just in isolation, but actually an ecosystem that is intersectional, right? And so I think, Yasmin, to what you were saying right now around these 5-year grants, I completely agree with you. And also it's looking at the various impacts of work of a movement that needs to be funded, and being able to call out funders and say, who's going to fund the infrastructure of the organizations for the next 10 years? Who's going to fund the mental health of their staff and organizers? Because these are lived experiences that we're organizing around. Who's going to fund the policy work? Who's funding the digital organizing work? Who's funding the lobbying work? So that it's an ecosystem and not an isolation of trying to kind of popcorn fund some of these things.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it actually leads me into my question for Jessica. And so, Jessica, I know that you've been working a lot in the intersection and working around BIPOC work in general, and then also with everything that Frontline does. And we know everything that Frontline does, and I'm sure you have a hand in much of it. My question to you is, though, where can foundations and philanthropy do better, right? Like, where should there and where can there be more focus on the work?
Achieving community empowerment.
Yeah, and I thank you again, as everyone has said. I'm an LA kid. I'm a Black Mexican, so this conversation is very near and dear to my heart. So I was happy I was on mute and not on camera when everyone else was speaking, because I was like, yes, these are California. It is a microcosm of where the rest of the country can be. And I think so thinking about foundations, we are just now having the conversation with foundations that, philanthropy was set up as a haven for white wealth. And so if you can't get that, then we can't go really anywhere. So we have to set up that foundation. And then talking to just the way in which foundations are structured, where they fund single issues. But as we know from so many great, Black women who've told us, we are not single issue people. We do not live single issue lives, particularly with the Latino population. We come in all different shades, all different colors. And as Carmen said, the border, we didn't cross the border crossed us. That is what my abuelita would tell me all the time. She is from, California. And she said, I'm from California before California was California, right? So when you would think about when you think about the structure of philanthropy, and with most of our systems and structures, they were never set up for equity, right? They were only set up for exclusion. So there is just some basic conversations we have to have. And if we are going into we're going into conversations about what can we do, what can we fund, we have to check our clients and say, you are not the savior. You're not the wealthy white person on the hill looking down at the poor brown people and wondering why they're acting the way that they are. really foundations need to understand that this isn't about charity. This is about funding reparations for oppressive systems. And so I think for us at Frontline, we helped to develop this tool called the Equity Footprint to really gauge foundations, footprint essentially for equity in every single aspect of what they do. And so it's not just about their hiring and their firing. It's not just about who they're giving grants to. It's about your communications. It's about your investments. It's about your leadership and governance structure. So we're looking at equity holistically so that one, it's not shouldered on the HR lady, that didn't want to do this work in general. And I say HR lady, I do organizational, demographics, and it's mostly a woman who is the HR lady. So that is what I'm saying. But also, we want to give responsibility to everyone in the organization, that equity is for the health and sustainability of the entire organization. So for us, it's really not just saying you need to start funding, these organizations and these ones who are led, but understand why you haven't funded them. To walk them through why this has never showed up on your radar. Walk them through why you haven't had these conversations with yourselves as to why now, BIPOC, which I was in a meeting once and this woman kept saying biopic, and I was thinking, like a biopic? Like, is she making a movie? And I realized, and I was like, oh no. And Denise knows I work, with her brother, who is my boss, and he knows I have no poker face. So I'm in the meeting like, oh, and he's like, fix your face. He's like typing in the chat, fix your face, fix your face. So, I think in part of it, it's having the conversation prior as to why are you not here? Why is BIPOC such an interesting term for you? Why have you never heard of the term Chicano? Put the onus on the foundation to educate itself and ask itself those questions is what we try to do, and where I think folks can really start.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate you getting in the equity footprint, because that was going to be my next round of questions that was coming at you. And we're running out of time, so I'm glad you were able to get that in. So I appreciate you. So Jasmine, I just have a follow-up question for you just around foundations and funding. And what would you like funders to know about the work that you do and why it should be funded?
Oh gosh, I think I think it's just so incredibly important. I think that one of the things I'm most proud of is the diversity of our team. We represent, many different backgrounds and walks of life, and come from a very intersectional lens. And, one of the things that I also I didn't get to talk about earlier is that, sometimes folks don't really understand the nuances and how, like, sometimes being clumped as Latinos doesn't represent the many other experiences as Chicanos and their experience, and oftentimes gets misrepresented, as well as it does for APIs. As a Samoan woman, I oftentimes feel underrepresented in many different spaces. But what I think can happen is that we're doing the work that folks are not wanting to fund and do work in the juvenile halls and the youth prisons, getting on the streets and organizing young people and families. I think that oftentimes folks are like, it's a philanthropy that they're like, that's not real sexy for them, right? Like, why should we pay for folks to do outreach work or street work? Because what does that look like, and how does that make direct impact? I just think that what philanthropy can do is just really restrict in the ways that they're providing funding to organizations to allow folks to actually do the work, to trust that organizations have the ability to make significant change in the work that they're doing. And so I think that just restricting the ways that they are traditionally funding. And I think if anything that has taught us something is that the pandemic has allowed many of our organizations and folks to understand that we oftentimes are meeting the needs when we have no resources. And we've seen that happen during the past year. And I think that that's some of the ways that folks can, and obviously all of the demands that you all have stated in the report are ways that philanthropy can make a significant change.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to just thank you three again, Jessica, Jasmine, and Yasmin, for this conversation. And I'm going to turn, there's going to be much more to come. Like, there's so much more. I wish we had more time, dig deeper. I would love to connect with all three of you on another platform at some other time. I'm going to beg Denise for all of the information. But I'm going to turn it back over to Denise now for.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks, y'all. And stay on, because what I'm doing now before we wrap, and thanks for staying on as we go into the close. And I think that last question that you gave to Jasmine is a good segue to this. So everyone who's back or still here, if you could turn your cameras on, I want to welcome back all of our guests as we close out the program. I wanted to just bring us all back to close and really open the floor to anyone who, similar to what Jasmine just did, really shared just like, what is the call to action, right? Like, what's your call to action for those in philanthropy and for us all as we begin to identify more critically how to fight the erasure of story, right? And of people. And then to also interrogate, right, as Jessica talked about, right, like interrogate what our role has been in kind of the decisions that are being made with philanthropy and within our own institutions. So, please, we're wrapping, and so quickly, but I'd love to hear from folks, what is the call to action and or what will you do, right, to continue to elevate this conversation and to be thoughtful about this moving forward. So I'll leave the floor open.
I'll just jump in and say, I'm just to create a frame. I just want to jump on what Mr. Nene and Jasmine said about the hard work, right, that organizations have to do in order to do proof of concept for foundations, and how onerous it is to pull together reports and all of that. And if there's a way, and I believe Chris touched on this as well, if they can have like less reporting, general operating support, let the people on the ground do the work, because we know they can do it. Multi-year funding, all of that, right? All the things that people in philanthropy have been saying, or people on the ground have been saying for so long, and philanthropy is just actually listening a little bit. So I think we need to push that forward.
I think to go back on that, I think continuing to interrogate the structure of philanthropy to understand the inequitable practices that have built these structures that made it difficult for folks who are on the ground needing resources and who are doing the actual work. And I think also to push back against this idea of scarcity. It's important to understand the commonalities and differences in the opportunities and challenges faced by different populations to give opportunities needed to inform those kind of interventions and those strategies that Dr. Hurtado was talking about. So really pushing also back against the scarcity model. Oh, if we're going to, give to girls of color, what about white girls? Or what about, Black boys? And you can have all of those work together. We have been in communities, folks of color in communities, we all work together. We don't leave anyone behind. So if you're going to fund girls of color, you're going to get the whole community, and I just finished writing this report about Black women leaders in philanthropy. And one woman said, like, when you support Black women, everybody eats. Like, when you support a Chicana woman, everyone's going to eat. So like, just don't worry. We know what to do. Just give us some money. Don't worry about us. Worry about yourselves. Then that's, I think,
that's right. That's right.
What we're going to do.
That's right.
I have to build off of that, because I think, Dr. Barron, I think you're absolutely right. I think definitely question the systems that have been historically set up that are working, are not working. I think for HIP, I'm excited to announce that for the first time, we will be funding multiracial intersectional work at the end of 2021 and 2022. Looking at you, Carmen and Nane, and we're also specifically looking at Afro-Latino, Afro-Mexicano-led organizations. And for us, and my call to philanthropy is listen, give them the resources, connect them, get out the way, and remove any kind of granting practices that are rooted in white supremacy or are going to make things harder already for our organizations that are running on empty. So we're really excited to be able to do that. So please stay tuned for that. And I do want to say also, Skull Foundation has been a key partner in helping us build that work. And we will be calling philanthropy to come in and build with us and do this intersectional movement building funding work that is unrestrictive. It's just do the work, whatever you need. You don't have to show me the numbers. You can share impact by video or, letters, but we're not going to sit here and ask for some BS metrics around it. So let's, for philanthropy, do that, get out of the way, give the funding, dip into your endowments, get it out into community and get out of the way.
Preach.
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to Crystal Haling. I think we should read more of what Crystal Haling is saying. I had never received anything. We got a grant and never received anything. It says no report, no this, no that, just 501c3. That's all I need. And it's amazing work. I think I like her writing. And one of the things that I would really stress on this to foundations is about we're land-based people, indigenous people without no land. And I'm encouraging people to try to purchase their land, their building, because where are we going to go? I mean, we see it in the Bay Area where organizations are just closing up because they can't afford it. If they would have bought their land 20 years ago, it would have been theirs by now. And that's what we're doing in Santa Cruz. We're a model for that. And I'd like to continue to see. And thank you, Jasmine, for putting that on multiracial work, because that's what we've been doing. And thank you, Carmen, always there for you. Hope all my relations.
This is Chris. I'll chime in. I wrote, as Denise mentioned, a book called Delusional Altruism, which is really about how funders are often genuine in their altruism and genuinely want to create change, social change, advance racial justice, but are getting in their own way. And so, someone mentioned funders get out of the way. They actually need to get out of their own way. And through, feeling fearful, having that scarcity mindset, kind of only funding the national safe organizations. And a lot of that happens in boardrooms. And I think a lot of times we're working with the staff of foundations who are on board or trying to get on board, but it's really the board members, the trustees, that are holding a lot of the power. And so for me, my own call to action for myself is to continue to try to speak truth to power in boardrooms. I think that's so important. And certainly to continue to advance advocating for supporting BIPOC organizations and BIPOC-led organizations doing the work, and through the multi-year funding, the general operating support, the make it easy, the kind of funding that Crystal Haling of the Lieber Foundation gave to Nane to really just say, we believe in you. Here's the money you need. Go do what you need to do.
Great. Carmen or Dr. Yep, go ahead, Carmen.
So I was going to wait for Aida to. Did you want to say something first, Dr. Hutala?
I'll just say real quick, this is being very stimulated because there's all these intersections, right? Because we all come from different perspectives with sort of the commitment to sort of do something meaningful rather than get caught up in rhetoric and fight about the rhetoric, rather than saying we all have different rhetoric, but what do we really want to do? And so there were two things. One is that I think that documentation becomes very important. So the article you wrote about philanthropy, or even the article that I read about Glover and Nane, was very impactful because we're invisible, right? And so I wrote a chapter in one of my books on Nane's organization and how he helped my brother readjust after prison. And that's one of the chapters that is most popular with young people, with teachers. They assign it in high schools because they can see a solution that's tied to the work that is being done in these organizations. And many times people don't put those two things together, that outcomes, what are the individual outcomes that come out of this kind of structure that, that is built on experience, corazón, expertise, dedication, passion. and we're just not socialized into that. Socialized into variables and medication, right? Basically, those are the two things. And so this holistic kind of thing, and that's what I tried to do in that chapter. And then in my last book, I wrote the chapter on the Women's March. And again, that was non-funded work. It was a lot of volunteer work. The whole event was people getting on board. When I got on the plane, there were women that were using their mileage, they could have used for vacation, but they were using it to go to the march. They were bringing their daughters. And I wrote that really fast because I thought if we don't capture that now, we're not going to see it, right? So it really impresses upon me that the making this visible through various, like you said, Jasmine, through videos or through whatever, through social media, that to me is my call to action. Is to sort of say, and I try to do it, whenever people ask me to do stuff, I'm there, but I never realized that the writing about it or the having students make videos about it is such an important intervention for getting people that don't know about these things or can't conceive of them, and what a great teaching tool it is.
So one of the things is I want to feel that power of embracing my Chicanismo, because my identity as a Chicana allows me to live in multiple worlds and be a bridge. But I often feel that I hinder the organization because I'm not the group that is currently being funded. And so there have been discussions on our staff calls. I've shared with some of my staff members of potentially moving away so that the organization can be fully funded, right? And Denise and I have also tried to say things like it's intercultural, but it's also Black and brown led, right? But my identity is it's such a huge part of who I am. And so my call to philanthropy is to educate you on who I am as a Chicana, right? And the Chicano movement, and understanding that in the 1940s and 50s, Chicanos were working to combat structural racism, right? They were doing cultural revitalizations to achieve community empowerment, to reject assimilation. And I want to be able to live with my truth of that, right? In the 1960s, the Chicano movement was influenced by the Black Power movement, right? Leaders like Porky Gonzalez, Reyes Tijerina, Cesar Chavez worked closely with Black Power leaders, and students co-organized walkouts as it pertained to police brutality, right? This was in the 1960s. And so we have always worked at the intersection of all these issues, whether it's Black and brown solidarity, police brutality, structural racism, eliminating structural racism, all these different things. And philanthropy has not caught up to us, right? And it's because we are misunderstood as a community, as a identity, but not just philanthropy. Even our own Latinx leaders have forgotten about us when you think about who to fund or who to give that award to. And it's really been Black community members and leaders that have embraced us Chicanos, right? And so, not only to philanthropy, like what I say to philanthropy is, one, catch up, right, on who we are as a people of this country, and also invest in us. Don't forget about us, learn about us, and bring us into the table to have these conversations of building intersectionally and building multicultural organizations, because that is our identity. And so thank you, everybody. So I felt so strongly to say that because oftentimes, it feels like the kumbaya, but we also have to be honest that philanthropy is continuing to perpetuate the systems of oppression that we wake up trying to fight against every single day.
Thank you, Carmen, and thank you, everyone. And we got a lot to do, all of us here and all of us listening. We need to study. We need to listen to Black women. We need to get out of the way. We need to listen to Chicano women. We need to get land. We need to dismantle systems. We need to self-determine. We need to support. We need to fund. We need to document, as Dr. Aida told us. So, as we come to a close, and I'm going to turn it to you, Nane, in just a moment. I just want to take this time to, again, just thank all of you. Thank you to Renee, to Dr. Hurtado, to you, Carmen, to Mr. Nane, to you, Chris, to Dr. Barron, to Yasmin, and to you, Jasmine, as well. Please tap into these incredible people and their incredible organizations. As you've seen today, they have a lot to say, and we have a lot to learn from each of them. So this is our 16th year celebration. We're going to close. I'm going to pass it to Mr. Nane to close. So again, thank you to all of the guests. We'll stay in touch, and I hope we can continue this conversation because as many of you have said, this is so complex, it's so nuanced, and we need to continue to have this conversation both in all the spaces that we touch. So thank you all. And I'll pass it to you, Mr. Nane. As the gathering is celebrating our 16th anniversary this week, we are really excited to continue the work that we're doing and really think about, as I think Chris said, think about what are the next 16 years and the next 32 years look like. So we hope that you liked what you heard tonight. We hope that you believe in our work. We hope that you will consider investing in our work. You can do so by texting The Gathering to 44321 or by visiting our website, which is gatheringforjustice.com. We also invite you to follow the work that we're doing, and each of us, as we're doing them in different regions of the country, on social media, in other ways by signing up to mailing lists. You can follow The Gathering at gather4justice on Twitter and Instagram. And again, thank you to all of you. And I will transition to Mr. Nane to close us out with some medicine. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Let me go back to Carmen's 32, just add 40 to it. And ain't no stopping, ain't no stopping. 72 years old, and I have great leaders that are still giving me orders that are 20 years older than I am. So Carmen, somebody just handed this to me and says, the graphic artist just made that up. She's listening and she got inspired. So, thank you, Creator, for this beautiful gathering. Thank you for these beautiful leaders here, Grandfather. We ask you to take care of them, take care of all their children, their grandchildren, their aunties, their moms, and those that are about to be moms. This is a long road. This is a long road, and we got to continue. As my leader, Mr. B, told me the other day, he says, it's a long struggle, Nane, and we got to keep going. It's not going to end. And so we have to stay strong. We have no time for jealousy. We have no time for bickering. We have no time for all that stuff that's kept us away. We have to come together as multicultural. We have to come together as love. And our brothers and sisters that are incarcerated, they're waiting for us. They're waiting for us to bring them back out of here, as we've seen many that are doing incredible work. To all our Native people that are suffering out there, to all the people that are in wars, and all the veterans that are still in prison. As a Vietnam veteran, I pray for them. We just blessings to everything every word that was said today. Help us achieve what we need to, And with your support, with your guidance, we can do it. Thank you, everybody. Love you all my relations. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Nane. And good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.